She sat in the back, hands folded, lips pressed tight. The committee spoke over her, ranking officers, polished lawyers, confident men. But when the footage played, grainy at first, until a voice echoed through the static. Her voice, calm, commanding, brave, and suddenly, the narrative cracked wide open. The room turned, and she wasn't silent anymore. From which part of the world are you witnessing this moment of truth today? If you believe that justice sometimes requires breaking silence, even when powerful forces demand compliance, consider subscribing for more stories that prove courage can shatter even the most carefully constructed lies. The mahogany-paneled hearing room in the Hart Senate office building carried the weight of decades of congressional investigations, its walls lined with portraits of former committee chairs whose stern gazes seemed to observe the proceedings with historical judgment. At 0900 hours on a crisp October morning, the Senate Armed Services Committee convened for day 3 of hearings into allegations of misconduct during Operation Mountain Shield, a classified special operations mission in Afghanistan that had resulted in civilian casualties and international controversy. Major Jessica Torres sat in the designated witness section, her dress blue uniform immaculate despite the stress that had consumed her life for the past 8 months since the incident. At 33 years old with over 2,400 flight hours as a helicopter pilot, Torres had built her career on precision, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to protecting both her crew and the civilians in areas where she operated. Now she found herself at the center of a political firestorm that threatened to destroy not only her military career, but also the reputation of the entire special operations community. The committee room buzzed with the controlled energy that characterized high-stakes congressional hearings, where careers could be destroyed and institutional credibility challenged through carefully orchestrated questioning and strategic media positioning. Television cameras captured every gesture and expression, while journalists filled the gallery seats, ready to disseminate whatever narrative emerged from the day's testimony. Senator William Harrison, the committee chairman, called the hearing to order with the gravitas that came from 30 years in the Senate and countless investigations into military operations that had gone wrong. At 68 years old, Harrison had built his political reputation on aggressive oversight of defense, spending, and military accountability, often using high-profile hearings to advance his own political agenda while claiming to protect American interests. This committee reconvenes to continue our investigation into Operation Mountain Shield, Harrison announced, his voice carrying across the packed hearing room. We are here to determine the facts surrounding civilian casualties that occurred during a classified mission, and to assess whether military personnel followed appropriate rules of engagement and command protocols. Torres listened to Harrison's opening statement while reviewing the legal briefing materials that her military attorney had prepared for the hearing. The case had become a political lightning rod after leaked information suggested that American forces had been responsible for civilian deaths during what was supposed to have been a precision operation against high-value terrorist targets. The official narrative, as presented by senior military leadership and Pentagon officials, maintained that Torres had exceeded her authority during the mission, engaging targets without proper authorization and causing civilian casualties through reckless action. The version of events that had been constructed by military lawyers and public affairs specialists painted her as an inexperienced pilot who had made critical errors in judgment under pressure. Major Torres, Harrison continued, you are present today as a witness in these proceedings. Your testimony will be taken under oath, and you are advised to answer all questions truthfully and completely. Torres understood the legal and professional implications of her situation. She had been advised by her military counsel to provide minimal responses to committee questions, avoiding any statements that might be construed as admissions of wrongdoing or challenges to official accounts of the operation. The strategy emphasized legal protection over truth-telling, prioritizing career preservation over accountability. Major Torres, said Senator Patricia Caldwell, the ranking minority member, do you understand the gravity of the allegations that have been made regarding your conduct during Operation Mountain Shield? Yes, ma'am, Torres replied, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil that had plagued her since the incident 8 months earlier. The allegations had emerged from an investigation initiated after Afghan government officials complained to international media about civilian casualties during the operation. The story had been picked up by major news outlets, creating public pressure for congressional oversight and military accountability that had transformed a classified special operations mission into a political controversy. The committee has received testimony from multiple witnesses regarding the events of March 15th. Harrison continued, consulting notes prepared by committee staff who had spent weeks developing the narrative framework for the hearings. We have heard from your commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel David Parker, who has testified that you engaged targets without authorization and ignored direct orders to cease fire. Torres felt her jaw tighten as she listened to Harrison's characterization of Parker's testimony. The lieutenant colonel had commanded the operation from a forward operating base, relying on radio communications and drone feeds to monitor a situation that had unfolded rapidly and required split-second decisions from personnel on the ground and in the air. We have also heard from Pentagon officials who have reviewed the mission after-action reports and concluded that proper protocols were not followed, Harrison added, referring to testimony that had been carefully coordinated between military leadership and committee staff to support a predetermined narrative about command failures and individual responsibility. The Pentagon's position reflected institutional interests in containing political fallout, while protecting senior leadership from criticism about mission planning and rules of engagement that had proved inadequate for the complex situation that Torres and her crew had encountered during the operation. However, Senator James Mitchell, a veteran of the Iraq War who served on the committee, interjected, "We have not yet heard directly from Major Torres about her perspective on these events. Major, can you tell this committee what happened during Operation Mountain Shield from your point of view?" Torres looked toward her military attorney, Captain Sarah Kim, who nodded slightly while maintaining the neutral expression that characterized legal counsel during high-stakes proceedings. Kim had advised Torres to stick to basic facts and avoid challenging the official narrative that had been constructed by senior military officials. Senator Mitchell, Torres began, "My crew and I were tasked with providing air support for a ground operation that was designed to capture or eliminate high-value targets in a compound near the Pakistan border. During the mission, we encountered a situation that required immediate response to protect American lives." The carefully worded response had been crafted to acknowledge her participation in the operation without contradicting official accounts or providing information that could be used to challenge institutional narratives. Torres felt frustrated by the constraints that prevented her from explaining what had actually occurred during the mission. "Major Torres," Harrison interrupted, "Lieutenant Colonel Parker has testified that you fired on targets despite explicit orders to hold fire. How do you respond to that allegation?" The question struck at the heart of the controversy that had consumed Torres's life for 8 months. The official account maintained that she had exceeded her authority and caused civilian casualties through unauthorized engagement of targets that had not been properly identified or cleared for attack. "Senator Harrison," Torres replied, "I followed the rules of engagement as I understood them, and I acted to protect American lives that were in immediate danger. My decisions were based on the tactical situation as it developed in real time." The response reflected the legal strategy that emphasized personal perception and tactical judgment rather than challenging command decisions or institutional policies. Torres understood that her military counsel was trying to protect her from court-martial proceedings that could result in criminal charges and imprisonment. "Major Torres," Senator Caldwell said, "the committee has reviewed radio transcripts from the operation that appear to show you received direct orders to cease fire. Do you dispute the accuracy of those transcripts?" The question addressed evidence that had been central to the official narrative about Torres's alleged misconduct. The radio transcripts had been edited and interpreted to support the conclusion that she had knowingly violated direct orders from her commanding officer. Senator Caldwell, Torres responded carefully. "Radio communications during combat operations can be difficult to interpret without understanding the full tactical context. Decisions about engagement and disengagement must be made based on immediate threats and the safety of personnel in contact." Torres felt constrained by legal advice that prevented her from explaining how radio communications had been interrupted by enemy jamming, how official transcripts had been edited to remove crucial context, and how the tactical situation had required decisions that couldn't be adequately conveyed through official reporting channels. "The committee has also reviewed gun camera footage from your aircraft," Harrison announced, referring to video evidence that had been analyzed by Pentagon officials and presented to support official accounts of the operation. This footage appears to show civilian structures being engaged during the operation. The gun camera footage had been selectively edited to show apparent civilian casualties without providing context about the tactical situation that had necessitated engagement or the enemy forces that had been using civilian areas for military purposes. The edited version supported the narrative about reckless engagement while concealing evidence that would exonerate Torres. Senator Harrison, Torres replied, gun camera footage shows only a limited perspective of tactical situations that involve multiple factors. Complete assessment requires understanding the full operational context. Torres knew that unedited footage from multiple sources would tell a completely different story about the operation, showing enemy forces using civilian areas as shields and American personnel responding to immediate threats with precision and restraint. However, the complete footage remained classified, preventing its use in her defense. As the morning testimony continued, Torres listened to questions that seemed designed to reinforce predetermined conclusions rather than establish facts about what had actually occurred during the operation. The committee members appeared to have already decided on a narrative that would satisfy political requirements while protecting institutional interests. During the lunch recess, Torres met with Captain Kim in a secure conference room adjacent to the hearing chamber. The military attorney had been reviewing classified materials that might be relevant to Torres's defense, but most evidence remained unavailable due to security classifications that prevented its use in public proceedings. Jessica, Kim said, the committee seems committed to the official narrative about command failures and individual responsibility. Our best strategy remains minimizing your exposure while avoiding any statements that could be used in criminal proceedings. Torres understood the legal logic behind her counsel's strategy, but she felt increasingly frustrated by her inability to present evidence that would demonstrate her actions had been appropriate and necessary given the tactical situation. The truth about Operation Mountain Shield remained buried under layers of classification and institutional protection. Sarah, Torres replied, there's footage from the operation that would completely change the committee's understanding of what happened. The drone feeds, the helmet cameras, the full radio communications, everything that shows we were responding to an active enemy attack. Kim nodded sympathetically while reviewing the constraints that prevented access to evidence that could exonerate her client. The classification levels make it nearly impossible to introduce that evidence in these proceedings. The Pentagon controls access, and they're not willing to declassify materials that might contradict the official narrative. Torres had spent months reviewing the classified evidence through official channels, knowing that complete footage and communications records would vindicate her decisions while exposing failures in mission planning and command oversight that senior officials preferred to conceal. What if there was a way to access the footage without requiring official declassification? Torres asked, referring to technical capabilities that she had developed during her military service but hadn't discussed with her attorney. Kim looked at Torres with concern, understanding that any unauthorized access to classified materials could result in serious criminal charges that would dwarf the current allegations about operational misconduct. Jessica, you cannot access classified materials without authorization. That would constitute a serious felony that could result in decades in prison. Torres understood the legal risks while also recognizing that the truth about Operation Mountain Shield might never emerge through official channels. The institutional interests that protected senior leadership also prevented evidence from reaching the people who needed to understand what had actually occurred during the mission. As the afternoon session began, Torres returned to the witness table with a growing sense that justice would not emerge through normal processes. The committee members continued their questioning with apparent predetermined conclusions, while television cameras recorded proceedings that would reinforce official narratives regardless of factual accuracy. Major Torres, Senator Harrison resumed. Pentagon officials have testified that your actions during Operation Mountain Shield violated multiple regulations and resulted in unnecessary civilian casualties. Do you accept responsibility for those casualties? The question demanded an admission of guilt that would satisfy political requirements while protecting institutional leadership from accountability for mission planning failures and inadequate rules of engagement. Torres felt the weight of 8 months of legal pressure designed to force her acceptance of responsibility for decisions that had been necessary and appropriate. Senator Harrison, Torres began, her voice carrying new determination. I accept responsibility for every decision I made during Operation Mountain Shield. However, this committee deserves to understand the complete tactical situation that required those decisions. Captain Kim looked at Torres with alarm, recognizing that her client was deviating from the agreed-upon strategy of minimal responses and careful legal protection. The military attorney understood that Torres was preparing to challenge official narratives in ways that could have serious legal consequences. Major Torres, Harrison continued, you are here to answer questions, not to provide speeches about tactical situations. The committee has access to all relevant information about Operation Mountain Shield. Torres understood that the committee had access only to information that supported predetermined conclusions, while evidence that would demonstrate the necessity and appropriateness of her actions remained hidden behind classification barriers that served institutional rather than truth-seeking purposes. Senator Harrison, Torres replied. With respect, the committee has access only to selectively edited materials that do not provide the complete picture of what occurred during the operation. The statement created tension in the hearing room as Torres challenged the foundation of the investigation while suggesting that evidence was being concealed from congressional oversight. Committee members exchanged glances that reflected concern about maintaining control over proceedings that were being broadcast nationally. Major Torres, Senator Caldwell interjected, are you suggesting that this committee is not receiving complete information about Operation Mountain Shield? The question provided Torres with an opportunity to address the core issue that had prevented accurate understanding of the operation while protecting senior officials from accountability for mission planning and oversight failures. Senator Caldwell, Torres responded, I am stating that critical evidence remains classified at levels that prevent this committee from understanding the tactical situation that required immediate response to protect American lives. Torres reached into her uniform pocket and withdrew a small digital storage device that contained footage and communications recordings she had compiled through technical means that didn't require official declassification procedures. The device represented months of careful work to preserve evidence that institutional processes were designed to conceal. Major Torres, Captain Kim said urgently, please consult with counsel before taking any action that could affect your legal standing. Torres understood that accessing and revealing classified information could result in serious criminal charges, but she also recognized that the truth about Operation Mountain Shield would never emerge through official channels designed to protect institutional interests rather than establish factual accuracy. Senator Harrison, Torres announced, I have in my possession footage from Operation Mountain Shield that provides the complete tactical context for decisions that have been mischaracterized by this investigation. The statement created immediate commotion in the hearing room as committee members, attorneys, and journalists recognized that Torres was preparing to reveal evidence that could fundamentally alter understanding of the operation and its aftermath. Major Torres, Harrison said sharply, you are not authorized to present classified materials to this committee without proper declassification procedures. Torres stood from the witness table, her decision crystallizing around the understanding that institutional processes were designed to conceal rather than reveal truth about military operations that affected both American personnel and civilian populations. Senator Harrison, Torres replied, the American people deserve to understand what actually occurred during Operation Mountain Shield, and this footage provides that understanding. Torres approached the committee's audiovisual equipment, inserting the digital device, while committee security personnel looked to Senator Harrison for guidance about whether to intervene. The situation had evolved beyond normal hearing procedures, creating uncertainty about appropriate responses to unprecedented circumstances. This footage shows the complete tactical situation as it developed in real time, Torres announced as the first images appeared on the committee room's large display screens. It includes drone feeds, helmet camera footage, and complete radio communications that provide context for every decision made during the operation. The initial images were grainy and difficult to interpret, showing aerial views of the compound where the operation had taken place. The footage included timestamps and technical data that authenticated its origin and accuracy, providing credibility that had been absent from edited materials presented by Pentagon officials. As the footage continued, the tactical situation became clear. Enemy forces were visible using civilian areas as defensive positions, while American ground personnel were under coordinated attack from multiple directions. The images showed a complex battle environment where civilian and military targets were intermingled in ways that made engagement decisions extremely difficult. The official narrative has maintained that Major Torres engaged targets without authorization. Torres narrated as the footage played. This footage shows the radio communications that requested and authorized engagement to protect American lives under direct threat. The audio portion of the footage included complete radio conversations that had been edited in official transcripts. The unedited communications showed Torres requesting authorization for engagement while describing immediate threats to ground personnel, followed by clear authorization from operational commanders who understood the tactical situation. Committee members watched in silence as the footage demonstrated that Torres had followed proper procedures while responding to an enemy attack that used civilian areas for military purposes. The evidence contradicted official narratives that had characterized her actions as unauthorized and reckless. The drone footage shows enemy forces positioning weapons systems in civilian structures. Torres continued as the images revealed the tactical complexity that had required immediate response. Ground personnel were under coordinated attack from multiple positions that required precision engagement to prevent American casualties. The footage showed enemy forces using women and children as human shields while conducting attacks against American personnel, creating tactical situations where engagement was necessary to protect American lives despite the tragic presence of civilians in the operational area. The gun camera footage shows precision engagement of military targets. Torres narrated as the display revealed the accuracy and restraint that had characterized her actions during the operation. Every target engaged was identified as an immediate threat to American personnel, and engagement was terminated as soon as threats were neutralized. The complete footage demonstrated that civilian casualties had resulted from enemy tactics rather than American errors, showing how terrorist forces had deliberately placed civilian populations in danger to create political consequences for American operations. As the footage concluded, the hearing room remained silent while committee members, journalists, and observers processed evidence that fundamentally contradicted the official narrative that had driven 8 months of investigation and political controversy. This footage has been available to Pentagon officials and military investigators throughout this process, Torres announced. The decision to present edited versions to this committee represents institutional choices about narrative control rather than factual accuracy. Senator Mitchell, the Iraq War veteran, was the first to respond to the evidence that Torres had presented. Major Torres, this footage appears to show a significantly different tactical situation than what has been described in official reports. Can you explain why this evidence was not provided to the committee previously? Torres understood that her revelation of classified footage had created legal exposure while also demonstrating the institutional failures that had prevented accurate understanding of Operation Mountain Shield. Senator Mitchell, Torres replied, this evidence was available through official channels, but classification procedures and institutional interests prevented its presentation to this committee or the American people. The admission created immediate controversy as committee members recognized that their investigation had been based on incomplete and misleading information provided by Pentagon officials and military leadership who had preferred narrative control over factual accuracy. Senator Harrison, Senator Caldwell said, it appears that this committee has been conducting an investigation based on selective presentation of evidence. I move that we suspend these proceedings until we can review the complete evidentiary record. Harrison found himself in an unprecedented situation where a witness had fundamentally altered the factual foundation of a congressional investigation through revelation of evidence that government officials had chosen to conceal. The political implications extended beyond the specific case to questions about institutional credibility and oversight effectiveness. This hearing is suspended pending review of the materials presented by Major Torres, Harrison announced. Committee staff will coordinate with relevant agencies to determine the classification status and admissibility of this evidence. As the hearing room cleared, Torres remained at the witness table while understanding that her decision to reveal classified footage had created both vindication and legal exposure. Captain Kim approached with obvious concern about the criminal charges that could result from unauthorized disclosure of classified materials. "Jessica," Kim said, "what you've done could result in decades in prison for violation of the Espionage Act. We need to prepare for serious legal consequences." Torres understood the risks while also recognizing that the truth about Operation Mountain Shield would never have emerged through official channels designed to protect institutional interests rather than establish factual accuracy. "Sarah," Torres replied, "sometimes doing the right thing requires accepting personal consequences for the greater good." Over the following weeks, the footage that Torres had revealed became the subject of intensive analysis by committee staff, Pentagon officials, and media organizations that recognized its significance for understanding Operation Mountain Shield and the institutional processes that had concealed critical evidence. The complete footage validated Torres's account of the operation while exposing failures in mission planning, rules of engagement, and command oversight that senior officials had preferred to conceal through selective presentation of evidence and narrative manipulation. Pentagon investigations concluded that Torres had acted appropriately throughout Operation Mountain Shield, following proper procedures while responding to enemy attacks that deliberately used civilian areas for military purposes. The institutional narrative that had characterized her actions as unauthorized and reckless was officially retracted. Major Torres demonstrated exceptional judgment and courage during Operation Mountain Shield, concluded General Patricia Rodriguez, who conducted the Pentagon's review of the complete evidence. Her actions saved American lives while minimizing civilian casualties in an extremely complex tactical environment. Criminal charges related to Torres's revelation of classified footage were ultimately dismissed after congressional intervention and recognition that institutional failures had prevented proper oversight of military operations. Her clearance was restored, and she was promoted to lieutenant colonel with assignment to senior training positions. The investigation's conclusion led to significant reforms in military reporting procedures, congressional oversight protocols, and classification policies that had enabled institutional narrative control at the expense of factual accuracy and democratic accountability. Years later, as Colonel Torres commanded her own aviation wing, she would emphasize the importance of institutional courage and accountability in military operations that affected both American personnel and civilian populations worldwide. Sometimes the most important service requires challenging institutional narratives when evidence demonstrates they're wrong, Torres would tell her officers. Truth-telling is essential for maintaining both military effectiveness and democratic accountability. Her experience had demonstrated that individual courage could expose institutional failures while protecting both military personnel and civilian populations from the consequences of narrative manipulation and accountability avoidance. The footage that Torres had revealed became part of military training curricula, demonstrating both the tactical complexity of modern operations and the institutional responsibility to provide accurate reporting about military actions that affected civilian populations. Her story represented validation of the principle that democratic oversight required access to complete information rather than selective presentation of evidence designed to support predetermined narratives about military operations and individual responsibility. The congressional hearing that had begun with predetermined conclusions about individual misconduct concluded with institutional recognition that systemic failures had prevented accurate understanding of complex military operations that required both tactical expertise and moral courage. Torres's decision to break silence and reveal classified footage had demonstrated that sometimes justice required individual courage to challenge institutional narratives when evidence showed they were fundamentally wrong about military operations that affected both American personnel and innocent civilians worldwide.